The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as Admiral Zexathera of the Catherian Empire slammed his four-armed fist against the crystalline podium. His scales rippled with indignation as he addressed the assembled representatives of 47 species. "This is preposterous," his translator crackled. "You expect us to believe that a single human, a farmer, ended the greatest military campaign in galactic history?" Ambassador Chenwei remained perfectly still in her seat, her dark eyes reflecting the chamber's bioluminescent lighting. She had requested this emergency session not to boast, but to prevent further bloodshed. The other species needed to understand what had happened at Kepler 442b. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "I should start from the beginning." 3 months earlier, the war between the Catherian Empire and the hegemony of Srath had reached its crescendo. For 7 years, these two superpowers had torn through the Outer Rim territories, reducing entire systems to cosmic debris. Billions had died. Entire species had been driven to extinction. The smaller galactic civilizations cowered in their home systems, too weak to intervene. Kepler 442b was supposed to be irrelevant to the conflict, a backwater agricultural world, in neutral space populated by a few thousand human colonists who had fled Earth's overcrowded cities to pursue simple farming lives. The planet produced nothing but grain and vegetables, had no strategic minerals, and possessed no military installations. Marcus Chen was one of those farmers. At 53, he had spent the last 20 years cultivating wheat fields that stretched beyond the horizon. His weathered hands knew soil better than steel, and his greatest concern was usually whether the autumn rains would come on time. He had never held a weapon more sophisticated than a hunting rifle. When the war arrived at his doorstep, it came in the form of 2 massive fleets dropping out of hyperspace simultaneously. The Catherians and Srathi had chosen the Kepler system for their final battle, not because it mattered, but because it was empty enough that they could unleash their full arsenals without political consequences. Neither side had bothered to inform the human colonists. Marcus had been checking his irrigation systems when the sky caught fire. Thousands of ships materialized overhead, their hulls gleaming like deadly stars. Within hours, the orbital bombardment began. The 2 fleets ignored the planet's surface, focusing their fury on each other, but their stray shots carved smoking craters across the landscape. The other colonists fled to the underground shelters, but Marcus remained in his fields. This was his life's work, 47 years of carefully cultivated soil, genetic lines of wheat he had personally developed, an ecosystem he had nurtured with his own hands. He would not abandon it. As the battle raged above, he continued his work. He harvested what he could. He repaired damaged irrigation lines between bombing runs. When a Catherian fighter crashed into his eastern field, he pulled the wounded pilot from the wreckage and treated her burns with medical supplies from his farmhouse. The pilot, a young officer named Silthek, regained consciousness to find herself in a human's kitchen, her wounds bandaged with torn fabric from the farmer's shirt. Marcus sat beside her, offering water and speaking in halting Catherian he had learned from trade broadcasts. "Why help enemy?" she managed in broken standard. Marcus shrugged. "You're hurt. I help hurt things." Through her translator, Silthek explained that both fleets were locked in a standoff. The Catherians controlled the system's outer planets, while the Srathi held the inner worlds. Neither could advance without exposing themselves to devastating counterattack. The battle had become a siege that could last years. "Years?" Marcus asked, looking out at his burning fields. "This goes on for years?" That night, as weapons fire painted aurora across the sky, Marcus made his decision. His farmhouse contained an ancient earth-hunting rifle, a 3006 Springfield his grandfather had given him, designed for taking down large game at extreme range. Marcus had used it perhaps a dozen times in 2 decades, mostly to deter the local megafauna from his crops. He spent 3 days studying the fleet positions through his agricultural survey telescope, learning their patterns, timing their movements. The Catherian and Srathi flagships held position exactly 2.3 kilometers apart, locked in their eternal stalemate, neither willing to move first. On the fourth morning, Marcus climbed to the highest hill on his property. He set up the rifle on a makeshift rest built from farming equipment, adjusted for wind and gravity, and aimed at a point exactly between the two command vessels. He fired once. The chemical projectile, a simple lead bullet propelled by gunpowder, traveled at roughly 800 meters per second. In space combat, this was laughably slow. Any military computer would have calculated its trajectory and dismissed it as irrelevant. But the bullet struck something nobody had anticipated: a piece of debris from a destroyed escort ship, a fragment of hull plating tumbling in the no-man's space between the fleets. The impact sent the debris spinning into the Sarathi flagship's sensor array. The Sarathi computers interpreted this as an attack. Automated defense systems fired at the Catherian fleet. The Catherians responded in kind. Within 30 seconds, both flagships were exchanging fire. Within 10 minutes, both commanding admirals were dead. Within an hour, the leaderless fleets were in full retreat. Their carefully maintained standoff collapsed into chaos. The war ended not with a decisive battle or brilliant strategy, but with a farmer's single shot creating a cascade of misunderstandings that neither side could control. Ambassador Chen finished her account and looked around the chamber. Marcus Chen returned to his fields the next day. He replanted his wheat and repaired his irrigation systems. When we contacted him about this session, he said he was too busy with harvest season to attend. Admiral Zexathera's scales had shifted to a pale yellow, the Catherian expression of bewilderment. "One shot," he whispered. 7 years of war ended by one shot from a farming implement. "Not just any shot," Chen corrected. "A shot fired by someone who understood that the simplest solution is often the most effective. Someone who saw two forces locked in pointless conflict and found the smallest possible intervention to change everything." She stood and gathered her papers. "The human farmer didn't end your war through superior firepower or brilliant tactics. He ended it by being willing to act when action was needed, using what he had available, accepting responsibility for his world." As the council chamber erupted in debate, Chen smiled quietly. Marcus would have his harvest in on time after all. Back on Kepler 442b, a farmer continued his work, never knowing that his name would become legend across 47 worlds. The human who proved that sometimes the most ordinary people could reshape the galaxy with a single, perfectly placed shot.